Rain lashed the cobblestones of Mayfair as a flawless sapphire was pressed silently into a trembling palm. She uttered no tearful accusations, demanding nothing. Turning her back on England's most powerful duke, she stepped into the tempest, completely unaware that his velvet-lined carriage was rolling into the storm behind her. Music drifted from the open French doors of the Cavendish estate, a lilting waltz that seemed to mock the violent shattering of Azariah Wentworth's heart. Inside the grand ballroom, 1,000 beeswax candles cast a golden, heavenly glow over London's elite. Silk gowns rustled, crystal glasses clinked, and the intoxicating scent of hothouse roses masked the rot of high society's whispers. Azariah stood perfectly still in the shadowed alcove of the terrace, her breath hitching painfully in her chest. Her fingers, clad in thin ivory silk gloves, instinctively went to the heavy sapphire ring resting on her left hand. It was an antiquity of the Marshall family, a stone as deep and unfathomable as the ocean, given to her just 3 weeks prior by Aaron Marshall, the Duke of Rothbury. Their betrothal had been the scandal and the fairy tale of the season, the impoverished daughter of a disgraced baronet claiming the heart of a notoriously impenetrable duke. But fairy tales, Azariah was rapidly learning, were simply pretty lies dressed in expensive binding. Just moments ago she had been searching for Aaron to request a glass of lemonade. Instead, she had stumbled upon the hushed, damning conversation in the library between Aaron's cousin, Lord Henry Davenport, and the notorious gossip, Lady Beatrice Seymour. "It is a masterstroke of misdirection, Beatrice," Henry had chuckled, the sound dripping with aristocratic malice. "Aaron is entirely brilliant. The Wentworth girl is nothing but a shield. While the ton is distracted by this romantic farce of a betrothal to a penniless nobody, Aaron's solicitors are quietly finalizing the true marriage contracts with the French heiress, Mademoiselle de la Roche. The debts to Count's bank are too vast. He needs the French fortune. Poor Miss Wentworth is merely holding the ring until the ink dries." "Cruel, but necessary," Lady Beatrice had replied, tapping her fan. "But what of the girl? She looks at him as though he hung the moon." "She will be paid off handsomely," Henry sneered. "A small estate in Cornwall, perhaps. Her father's debts erased. She is a commodity, Beatrice. Aaron knows the cost of doing business." The words had struck Azariah with the force of a physical blow. A commodity, a shield, a distraction. The tender kisses in the garden, the whispered promises against her skin, the way his stormy gray eyes softened only for her. It was all a calculated performance to hide his impending marriage to a woman whose dowry could save his heavily mortgaged estates. Now, standing in the cold draft of the terrace, Azariah watched Aaron emerge from the crowd. He was breathtaking, moving with the innate predatory grace that commanded every room he entered. His dark tailcoat sat perfectly across his broad shoulders, his cravat tied with austere precision. When his eyes, those striking, traitorous gray eyes, found her in the shadows, his face illuminated with a rare, devastating smile. He moved toward her, his hand extended. "Azariah, my love, I have been looking everywhere for you. They are playing our waltz." She did not speak. She could not speak, for fear that if she opened her mouth, a fractured, undignified sob would claw its way out. The humiliation burned in her veins, toxic and suffocating. She would not be the weeping, broken creature they expected her to be. She would not wait to be discarded and bought off like a favorite mare. Aaron stopped, his smile faltering as he registered the icy rigidity of her posture. "Azariah, you are pale. What has happened?" With movements as slow and deliberate as a somnambulist, Azariah reached out. She took his large, warm hand in hers. For a fraction of a second, her thumb brushed over his knuckles, a final, agonizing touch of a man she had loved with every fiber of her being. Then, she turned her hand over. She slipped the heavy Marshall sapphire from her finger. Aaron's breath hitched. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice laced with sudden, raw panic. Azariah placed the warm ring onto the center of his palm and folded his long fingers over it. She met his gaze. Her eyes, usually warm and expressive, were completely void, sealed off behind a fortress of sheer, agonizing pride. She offered no explanation. She demanded no apologies. She simply looked at him, letting the silence roar between them, heavier and more devastating than any screaming match could ever be. "Azariah, please, speak to me," Aaron pleaded, a crack of genuine terror fracturing his composed facade. He reached for her, but she took a decisive step back, slipping entirely out of his grasp. Without a single word, Azariah turned her back on the Duke of Rothbury. She walked down the marble steps of the terrace, away from the warmth of the ballroom, away from the golden light, and stepped directly into the violent, unforgiving downpour of the London night. Icy rain battered Azariah instantly, soaking through her delicate muslin gown within seconds. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Mayfair, whipping her damp hair across her face, but she did not flinch. She welcomed the freezing deluge. It numbed her skin, matching the freezing void that was rapidly expanding in her chest. She had no maid with her, no chaperone, and no carriage. Her aunt's modest townhouse was nearly 2 miles away in Russell Square. In the treacherous streets of 1815, London, a lone woman, walking in the dead of night, was inviting peril. But Azariah was completely unmoored. The danger of footpads or drunkards seemed trivial compared to the absolute devastation of her betrayal. She walked with a relentless mechanical stride. Her silk slippers offered no protection against the jagged, rain-slicked cobblestones. Mud splashed against her ankles, ruining the fine silk embroidery she had painstakingly stitched herself for this very night. Back at the Cavendish estate, Aaron stood frozen on the terrace for 10 agonizing seconds, the cold sapphire burning a hole into his palm. The sheer abruptness of her departure had paralyzed him. When his mind finally caught up with his reality, a roar of desperation tore from his throat. "Azariah!" He sprinted down the marble steps, heedless of the rain instantly ruining his immaculate evening wear. He reached the iron gates of the estate just in time to see her slender figure disappearing around the corner of Berkeley Square. "Your Grace!" a voice called out. It was O'Malley, his loyal, weather-beaten coachman, holding a heavy wool cloak. The carriage is brought round, but the lady she walked right past. She refused the footman's offer of an umbrella. "Follow her," Aaron barked, his voice ragged. "Bring the carriage, now." Aaron threw himself into the dark, velvet-lined interior of his carriage. "Do not lose her, O'Malley, but keep a distance. Do not frighten her." The heavy carriage lurched forward, the magnificent matched bays fighting against the slick streets and blinding rain. Inside the cab, Aaron gripped the leather window strap, his knuckles white. His mind was violently turning, analyzing every interaction, every conversation of the evening. Why? What had happened to make her look at him as though he were a stranger? Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw her, a fragile silhouette moving steadily through the storm. Aaron's hand went to the brass handle of the carriage door. Every instinct in his powerful frame screamed at him to leap out, to sweep her into his arms, to carry her into the warmth of the carriage and demand answers. But he remembered the absolute terrifying emptiness in her eyes. It was a look of total severance. If he forced her into the carriage now, if he stripped her of the only thing she seemed to have left her agency, he would lose her forever. "Pace her, O'Malley," Aaron called up through the trapdoor, his voice tight with suppressed agony. "Keep right behind her. Shield her from the wind with the horses if you can, but do not intercept." And so began the most agonizing procession in London. For nearly an hour, the grand ducal carriage, bearing the ancient crest of the House of Marshall, crawled at a pedestrian's pace through the torrential downpour. It stayed exactly 15 paces behind the drenched, shivering figure of Miss Azariah Wentworth. Azariah heard the rhythmic, heavy thud of the horse's hooves and the slow creak of the carriage wheels behind her. She knew it was Aaron. She knew he was watching her from the dark interior. A lesser man would have ridden off in offended pride. A crueler man would have dragged her inside by force. But Aaron simply followed, a silent, massive guardian in the storm, ensuring no harm came to her in the perilous streets of St. Giles and Bloomsbury. The unspoken tension between the woman walking in the rain and the man trapped in the carriage was palpable, a vibrating string pulled to the breaking point. With every step, Azariah's feet blistered and bled. She shivered violently, her teeth chattering, but she refused to look back. She refused to acknowledge the carriage. "He is only protecting his investment," she told herself bitterly, forcing down the sob that threatened to choke her. "He pities the shield he has broken." Finally, the iron gates of Russell Square materialized in the gloom. Azariah dragged herself up the steps of her aunt's townhouse. Her hands shook so violently she could barely turn the brass handle. She pushed the door open and stepped into the dark foyer. Before she closed the door, she finally allowed herself to stop. Slowly, she turned her head. Through the sheets of rain, the great black carriage sat idling in the street. The heavy curtains of the window were pulled back. Even in the darkness, she could feel Aaron's intense, desperate gaze locked onto her. For a suspended moment in time, they stared at one another across the chasm of the storm. Then, silently, Azariah closed the door, shutting the Duke out in the cold. Morning broke over London like a bruised eye, the sky a miserable slate gray that perfectly mirrored the atmosphere inside the Duke of Rothbury's Grosvenor Square study. Aaron had not slept. He had not even changed out of his damp, ruined evening clothes. He stood by the roaring fireplace, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch he hadn't touched. The sapphire ring sat in the center of his massive mahogany desk, a condemning centerpiece. "Your Grace, you must sit." "You look absolutely wretched," murmured Mr. Josiah Hardwick, Aaron's senior man of business. Hardwick, a sharp-eyed man of 50 with ink-stained fingers, had been summoned at dawn. "I do not pay you to manage my health, Hardwick. I pay you to manage my affairs," Aaron snapped, though the exhaustion in his voice took the bite out of his words. "Tell me exactly what transpired yesterday while I was at the House of Lords. Who spoke to her? Who approached the Wentworths?" Hardwick nervously adjusted his spectacles, opening a thick leather ledger on the desk. "I have spent the last 3 hours querying our clerks and the servants at the Cavendish estate, Your Grace. It appears Miss Wentworth was entirely unbothered until roughly 11 o'clock last evening. She was seen approaching the library to find you. She never entered. She stood outside the door for perhaps 2 minutes, and then fled to the terrace." Aaron turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Who was in the library, Hardwick?" Hardwick swallowed hard. "Lord Henry Davenport, Your Grace, and Lady Beatrice Seymour." A chilling, dangerous silence descended upon the study. Aaron's grip on his glass tightened until the crystal groaned under the pressure. Henry, his charming, perpetually indebted cousin. "What are Henry's current financials, Hardwick? Be precise." "Dire, Your Grace," the solicitor replied, flipping a page. "He owes substantial sums to the gaming hells in St. James's. But more concerningly, I discovered a discrepancy this morning. Lord Henry has heavily invested in a speculative coal mining venture in Northumberland, a venture that requires capital he does not possess. However," Hardwick hesitated, looking up at the imposing Duke. "Speak, Josiah." "Now, the land required for the mining venture borders the remnants of the Wentworth ancestral estate, land that is currently held in trust. If Miss Azariah Wentworth were to marry a powerful peer, say yourself, Your Grace, that trust would be fortified, the debts cleared, and the land rendered permanently inaccessible to Lord Henry's syndicate. However, if Sir Thomas Wentworth goes fully bankrupt, the land reverts to the Crown, where Lord Henry has already bribed officials to purchase it for a pittance." The tumbler in Aaron's hand shattered. Amber liquid and crystal shards rained onto the Persian rug. He didn't flinch. "Henry needs her family ruined," Aaron stated, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. It was the voice he had used as a cavalry officer on the peninsula before ordering a charge. "Precisely, Your Grace. And there is more. I intercepted a courier this morning. Lord Henry had drafted a fraudulent marriage contract between yourself and a Mademoiselle de la Roche of Paris. It is a brilliant forgery, bearing your seal. He has been circulating rumors of this secret betrothal in the darkest corners of the Tun for a week, planting seeds that Miss Wentworth was merely your temporary distraction." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity in Aaron's mind. Azariah at the library door, the total devastation in her eyes, the silent return of the ring. She believed he was a monster who had used her to mask his financial ruin. She believed he was actively orchestrating her family's final destruction. She didn't scream. She didn't demand an explanation, Aaron whispered, a sudden fierce rush of awe piercing through his rage. She walked away to protect whatever dignity she had left. "God in heaven, she is magnificent." Aaron turned to his solicitor, his gray eyes blazing with a sudden lethal fire. Hardwick, draw up the papers. I am purchasing the entirety of Sir Thomas Wentworth's debt from Cootes Bank. Every last shilling. Transfer it to my private holdings and stamp it forgiven. Your Grace. That is nearly £40,000. I do not care if it is half my fortune. Do it, Aaron roared. And then send for the Bow Street runners. I want a warrant for fraud drawn up for Lord Henry Davenport by noon. He will rot in Newgate by nightfall. Yes, Your Grace. And what of Miss Wentworth? Aaron looked at the sapphire ring on the desk. He picked it up, wiping a smudge from the stone with his thumb. I am going to Russell Square, Aaron said softly. And I am going to wait on her doorstep until she understands that I would burn all of London to the ground before I ever betrayed her. Within the hour, Aaron, washed, shaved, and dressed in impeccable morning attire, was striding up the steps of the Wentworth townhouse. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and shining under the pale morning sun. He knocked firmly on the heavy oak door. It was opened by a flustered maid whose eyes widened to the size of saucers at the sight of the towering Duke. Your Grace, we were not expecting... I am here to see Miss Wentworth, Aaron said, stepping into the foyer with an air of absolute authority. I am afraid that is impossible, Your Grace, a cold, weary voice interrupted. Aaron looked up to see Sir Thomas Wentworth, Azariah's father, descending the staircase. The older man looked aged 10 years since Aaron had last seen him. He moved stiffly, leaning heavily on a cane. Sir Thomas, Aaron bowed slightly out of respect. I must speak with Azariah. It is a matter of the utmost urgency. Sir Thomas stopped at the bottom of the stairs, placing himself firmly between the Duke and the hallway leading to the sitting room. My daughter is violently ill with a fever this morning, Your Grace, having walked home in a tempest last night, Sir Thomas said, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and suppressed anger. But even if she were well, she has made her wishes explicitly clear. She never wishes to see your face again. You have done enough damage to my family, Rothbury. Leave my house. Aaron felt a cold dagger slide into his ribs. A fever. He had let her walk in the freezing rain. He should have dragged her into the carriage. He should have forced the truth upon her then and there. Sir Thomas, you must understand. She has been fed a lie, a poisonous, deliberate lie crafted by my cousin to steal your lands. I care nothing for lands, Sir Thomas barked, his cane striking the floor. I care for my daughter's heart, which you have entirely shattered. You will leave this house, Your Grace, or I shall be forced to call the constable, regardless of your title. Aaron stared at the fierce, protective father. He could push past him. He had the physical strength and the societal power to do whatever he pleased. But looking at the man's defensive posture, Aaron knew that forcing his way in would only confirm the narrative Henry had spun, that Aaron was a tyrannical lord who took what he wanted without regard for the Wentworths. Slowly, Aaron took a step back. I will leave, Sir Thomas, Aaron said quietly, but I will not concede. You tell Azariah that I was behind her in the carriage last night, and you tell her that I will be waiting. Word spread through London's elite circles with the terrifying speed of a wildfire. True to his parting vow, Aaron Marshall did not retreat to the cavernous, empty halls of Grosvenor Square. He ordered his men to anchor his imposing black carriage directly across from the Wentworth residence in Russell Square. For 3 agonizing days and nights, the Duke of Rothbury transformed himself into a sentinel of stone and grief. Morning, noon, and night, the carriage sat immobile. Aaron refused to leave his post, taking his meals, which consisted mostly of strong black tea and dry bread inside the cramped, velvet-lined interior. He dispatched his servants to fetch clean linens and dispatch his orders, turning his coach into a mobile command center. London high society was utterly scandalized. Dukes did not sleep in the street. Dukes did not lay siege to the modest homes of ruined baronets. But Aaron was entirely beyond the constraints of societal decorum. He was a man fighting for his soul. Inside the Wentworth townhouse, a different kind of battle waged. Azariah lay trapped in a terrifying, fevered delirium. The freezing rain of her midnight exodus had settled deep into her lungs, manifesting as a violent, racking illness. Her small bedroom was suffocatingly hot. a fire constantly roaring in the hearth, yet she shivered uncontrollably beneath layers of heavy quilts. In her fever dreams, she was trapped in an endless, echoing ballroom. The haunting melody of a waltz played backward, a distorted, mocking sound. She kept running toward the terrace doors, but the heavy Marshall sapphire on her finger grew in size and weight, pulling her down to the floor, acting as an anchor of betrayal. She would wake screaming, coughing until she tasted copper, crying out for her father, and sometimes, to her deep shame, crying out for Aaron. Sir Thomas sat helplessly by his daughter's bedside, his heart fracturing with every labored breath she took. Aunt Josephine, a stern woman with a normally unshakable constitution, wept silently as she bathed Azariah's burning forehead with cool water. The local apothecary had offered nothing but useless tonics and grim expressions, suggesting they prepare for the worst. On the morning of the second day, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the Wentworth foyer. Sir Thomas, weary and defensive, answered the door himself. Standing on the threshold was not the Duke, but an older gentleman with piercing blue eyes, carrying a heavy leather medical bag. It was Dr. Matthew Bailey, the most revered physician in England, the man who personally attended to King George III at Windsor Castle. Sir Thomas Wentworth, Dr. Bailey said, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. I have been summoned by His Grace, the Duke of Rothbury. I am given to understand your daughter is in critical condition. I did not ask for the Duke's charity, nor his physician. Sir Thomas stiffened, pride warring with his desperate fear. Dr. Bailey stopped and fixed the older man with a glare that brooked absolutely no argument. Sir Thomas, I am a man of science, not society. I care nothing for aristocratic squabbles. But I will tell you this. The Duke of Rothbury arrived at my private residence at 4 o'clock this morning. He did not send a servant. He came himself. He stood in my drawing room looking as though he had walked through hell, and he told me that if I did not save your daughter, he would see no reason to let the sun rise on his own life. Now, you may let your pride bury your child, or you may lead me upstairs. Sir Thomas's breath hitched. Without another word, he turned and led the royal physician up the narrow staircase. While Dr. Bailey waged war against the infection in Azariah's lungs, Aaron was waging a far more ruthless war across the city. He had temporarily abandoned his carriage to handle the poison at its source. With 2 burly Bow Street runners, led by the formidable Sir Nathaniel Conant himself, Aaron descended upon Brooks's Club in St. James's Street. The exclusive gentlemen's club was a sanctuary of hushed voices and high-stakes gambling, a place where the outside world was strictly forbidden from intruding. Aaron kicked the mahogany doors open with such violence they slammed against the paneled walls, fracturing the wood. The quiet murmur of the card room instantly died. Dozens of the most powerful men in Britain froze, cigars pausing halfway to their mouths, as the Duke of Rothbury strode into the room, flanked by officers of the law. Lord Henry Davenport was seated at a far faro table, a smug smile plastered across his handsome face as he gathered a pile of winnings. When he looked up and saw his cousin, the blood drained entirely from his cheeks. "Aaron, my dear fellow," Henry stammered, attempting to project a bravado he clearly did not possess. "What is the meaning of this theatrical entrance? We are in the middle of a hand." Aaron crossed the room with lethal, predatory slowness. The other gentleman scrambled out of his path, terrified of the murderous rage radiating from the Duke. Aaron stopped at the table. He did not yell. He did not raise his hand. He simply leaned down, planting his knuckles on the green baize, and spoke in a voice so quiet, so devoid of mercy, it chilled the room to absolute zero. "You have underestimated my capacity for vengeance, Henry," Aaron whispered. "Aaron, please, whatever you have heard, it is a misunderstanding. I have purchased your debts from the gaming hells," Aaron continued, ignoring the plea. "I have seized your fraudulent investments in Northumberland. I have the forged marriage contracts with the French heiress, bearing my stolen seal, currently sitting on the desk of the chief magistrate." Henry's hands began to tremble violently. "Aaron, we are family. You cannot do this." "You attempted to destroy the woman I love for a strip of coal-rich land," Aaron said, his voice finally cracking with emotion. You painted me as a monster to the only soul who ever saw me as a man. You are no family of mine." Aaron stood up straight and looked at Sir Nathaniel. "Arrest him for fraud, forgery, and extortion. Throw him in Newgate. If he attempts to post bail, inform the magistrate. I will personally double the sum to keep him rotting in the dark." As the Bow Street runners dragged a screaming, pleading Lord Henry out of the club, Aaron turned on his heel and walked back out into the dreary London afternoon. His vengeance was complete, his cousin ruined. Yet, as he climbed back into his carriage and ordered O'Malley to return to Russell Square, he felt no victory. Vengeance meant absolutely nothing if Azariah did not survive to forgive him. On the fourth morning, the relentless London rain finally ceased. A pale, fragile sunlight broke through the heavy cloud cover, casting long, golden shadows across the damp cobblestones of Russell Square. In her small bedroom, Azariah Wentworth took her first deep, unobstructed breath in days. Her eyelids fluttered, feeling heavy and encrusted with exhaustion. She slowly opened her eyes. The terrifying, suffocating heat of the fever had vanished, replaced by a profound, hollow weakness. She turned her head on the pillow. The room was bathed in soft morning light. Sitting in a chair by the window, asleep with a book resting on his chest, was her father. "Papa," she croaked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Sir Thomas woke with a violent start. He dropped the book, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hope. When he saw that her eyes were clear, that the terrifying flush of delirium had left her cheeks, a sob tore from his chest. He rushed to the bed, falling to his knees and pressing her weak hand to his lips. "My darling girl," he wept openly. Thank God, I am thirsty," she whispered. After drinking a glass of cool water, her mind slowly began to reassemble the fragmented memories of the past week. The ballroom, the conversation in the library, the crushing betrayal, the long, agonizing walk in the freezing storm. "How long have I been ill?" she asked, her voice gaining a fraction of its strength. 4 days, her father replied gently. He hesitated, looking toward the window. "Azariah, there are things you must know, things that transpired while you were lost in the fever." Sir Thomas stood up and walked to a small writing desk in the corner of the room. He picked up a thick stack of heavy parchment documents bound in a red ribbon. He returned to the bed and placed them on her lap. "What are these?" she asked, recognizing the imposing seal of Cootsbank. "They are the deeds to our ancestral estate, the promissory notes, the ledgers of my debt," Sir Thomas explained, his voice thick with emotion. "They were delivered 2 days ago by a solicitor. Every single debt our family owed has been paid in full. The estate is secure. We are entirely free, Azariah." Azariah stared at the papers, a cold dread washing over her. "He paid them off," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "He bought me off, just as they said he would. It is my severance." "No, Azariah," Sir Thomas said firmly, taking her hand. "Look at the seal on the ribbon." She looked closer. It was not the seal of Coutts Bank. It was the crest of the Duke of Rothbury. And attached to the ribbon was a small, heavy piece of parchment with a single word written in Aaron's bold, slashing handwriting: "Forgiven." "He did not buy our ruin, Azariah. He saved us from it," Sir Thomas continued. "It was Lord Henry who orchestrated the lies. Henry forged marriage contracts with a French heiress to make you believe Aaron was abandoning you. Henry needed our family bankrupt to steal our lands in Northumberland. The Duke discovered the plot the morning after the ball. He had Lord Henry arrested. He is currently locked in Newgate prison." Azariah's mind reeled. The magnitude of the revelation threatened to pull her back into the darkness. Henry lied. Aaron never betrayed me. He never planned to marry another. The agonizing pain she had carried in her chest for 4 days suddenly shattered, replaced by a desperate, overwhelming flood of relief and profound guilt. She had believed the worst of him. She had returned his ring without a single word. "Where is he?" she gasped, trying to push herself up against the pillows. "Where is Aaron?" Sir Thomas smiled a small, sad smile and pointed to the window. "He has not left, my dear." Azariah frowned in confusion. With her father's help, she threw off the heavy quilts. Her legs trembled violently as she stood, but pure adrenaline fueled her movements. She walked to the window, leaning heavily against the wooden frame, and looked down into the square. There, parked directly across the street, was the massive black ducal carriage. But Aaron was not inside it. He was standing on the cobblestones, leaning against the iron railing of the square's central garden. He wore the same ruined clothes he had worn the night of the ball. He was unshaven, his hair wildly unkempt, his broad shoulders slumped in an exhaustion so profound it was visible from the second-story window. He was staring unblinkingly at her front door. A shattered sob escaped Azariah's lips. "I must go to him. Azariah, you are too weak."
"Papa, please!"
she begged, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "I walked away from him without a word. I left him in the storm. I must go to him." Sir Thomas looked at his daughter's fierce, desperate eyes and nodded. He draped a heavy woolen shawl over her nightgown and helped her navigate the stairs. When the heavy oak front door creaked open, the sound echoed loudly in the quiet morning air. Aaron's head snapped up when he saw her standing in the doorway, pale and fragile, but standing on her own. He physically staggered. He pushed himself off the iron railing, his chest heaving. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The distance between the door and the street felt like an ocean. Azariah took a step forward, leaving the sanctuary of her home. She walked slowly down the stone steps. She didn't care that she was in her nightclothes in the middle of London. She didn't care about propriety. She only cared about the man standing before her. Aaron closed the distance between them in 3 massive, desperate strides. He stopped mere inches from her, his hands hovering over her arms, terrified that if he touched her, she might break, or worse, turn away again. "Azariah," he breathed, his voice broken and hollowed out by fear. "You are alive." "I am a fool," she wept, looking up into his exhausted, bloodshot eyes. "I believed them. I heard them in the library, Aaron. They said I was a shield. They said you were marrying a French heiress for her fortune. I thought every word you said to me was a lie." "Never," Aaron choked out, falling to his knees right there on the wet, dirty cobblestones. He wrapped his arms tightly around her waist, burying his face against her stomach. "Never a lie. I would have torn down all of London before I let anyone hurt you. I am so sorry, my love. I am so sorry I did not protect you from him." Azariah sank down to her knees, heedless of the cold mud soaking through her nightgown. She threw her arms around his neck, pulling him tightly against her. He buried his face in her neck, his large frame shaking with silent, racking sobs of relief. She held him fiercely, threading her fingers through his damp, tangled hair. "You followed me," she whispered against his skin. "In the rain. You followed me home." Aaron pulled back slightly, framing her face with his large, trembling hands. He looked at her with a devotion so absolute, so fierce, it stole her breath. "I will always follow you," he vowed, his thumbs gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. "To the ends of the earth, into the darkest storm. I will never let you walk alone again." With trembling fingers, Aaron reached into the pocket of his ruined coat. He pulled out the heavy Martial sapphire. It caught the pale morning light, glowing with an inner, eternal fire. "I cannot offer you a peaceful life, Azariah," Aaron said softly, his voice steadying with sudden, absolute conviction. "I come with a title that is a burden, a society that is cruel, and a family that is deeply flawed. But I can offer you my life, my heart, my unyielding loyalty. Please, Azariah, take it back. Take me back." Azariah looked at the ring, then up into the stormy gray eyes of the man who had laid siege to her heart and her home. She didn't hesitate. She held out her trembling left hand. "Put it on me, Aaron," she whispered, a radiant, tearful smile breaking across her face, "and never let me take it off." Aaron slid the heavy sapphire back onto her finger, sealing the vow. Right there in the muddy street of Russell Square, oblivious to the shocked stares of early morning pedestrians and the tearful gaze of Sir Thomas from the doorway, the Duke of Rothbury pulled his future Duchess into his arms and kissed her, finally bringing them both out of the storm and into the light. Did Azariah and Aaron's triumphant love story capture your heart? If you love historical romance filled with betrayal, dramatic twists, and absolute devotion, be sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your fellow romance lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking tales of love and redemption from the Regency era. Leave a comment below telling us your favorite moment from the Duke's desperate siege.